Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Lucas, and today we will be talking to Hugh O'Donnell from Combat Cat Podcast, which is a podcast based in Australia. Hugh O'Donnell is an active fighter. So we'll be talking to him about different marketing strategies, what's going on with him and his own fight career, and how he uses his podcast as a marketing tool for his fight career. So we're just waiting for him to get on. Should just be 1 minute. Last week we talked to William Liu, who is a prominent photographer in Australia as well. He has worked on Road Muay Thai, he has worked on Rebellion Muay Thai, so a lot of different shows. Hugh looks like he's on. Hello, Hugh.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. So why don't we give a brief introduction or introduce yourself? I know you're obviously in Australia. You run the Combat Chat podcast. Can you talk just very briefly about your Muay Thai journey?
Yes, absolutely. First off, thanks very much for having me on. My name's Hugh O'Donnell, as you said, based here in Sydney, Australia. I've been training in Muay Thai since I was a kid, since I was about 13 years old. Been fighting for 6 or 7 years now, fighting professionally for probably 3. The whole time based here out of Sydney. I made a couple of, done the standard thing as far as going to Thailand, just for sort of 3-month at a time trips. As I got a little bit older and a little bit more invested in my professional career myself. Well, it wasn't my idea, it was my trainer Shane's idea. Was for us initially as sort of a marketing exercise or a networking exercise, I more think you would say, for our gym, to start doing a podcast, start talking about what was going on at our gym, what was happening with our fighters. And then I think what we found for the most part is that nothing of the sort kind of existed within Australian Muay Thai. So as we started to talk about Australian shows and what was going on and like when there was a big show, give it a little rub, give it a breakdown. And we're just like nerds for Muay Thai, basically. So we know the sport quite intricately at a local level. So when we can kind of provide that little bit of a platform, that little megaphone for what's going on, I think people were very receptive to it. And what we found in doing that is promoters then wanted to talk to us about their shows to kind of have that platform that previously didn't exist. Fighters wanted to get on and sort of promote themselves a little bit more. So it's still very much at quite a local level, but we have found that the scene was very receptive, and it's been a useful tool for ourselves and for the Muay Thai scene to kind of provide that platform. So now fighting and podcasting in tandem.
Yeah, and you are on a weekly schedule, correct?
I mean, life gets in the way sometimes for sure, but I think we've been pretty consistent with being weekly. Like some weekends we just get, like we've done 3 in a day before. Like we just smash them out 3 at once. So, our consistency has been reasonably good. We generally get about 1 a week done.
And then it's also, how long have you guys been doing it for?
It's been a while now. It's been about 2 years now.
Oh, so that's a pretty good track record. I definitely heard about it maybe a year and a half ago or so. What do you think how has it personally impacted your fight career? Or has it impacted your career?
It definitely has. I think as far as, look, how has it influenced my fight career? Difficult to say, I guess. I think like how you're kind of represented as far as just how many people are aware of you is an important thing in a local fight scene. I mean, like I've had a reasonable number of fights. I've had like 30 something fights. So most of my ability to move up onto kind of the premier shows in Australia has come through sort of just activity. But I think it does serve as something of a separator to be able to, just, I guess, be the podcast guy. Like people see you on a show and be like, yeah, that's the dude from the podcast. But outside of things of that nature, it's just that little bit of, it's held my fight career by, the podcast has just been this amazing tool. And again, it's not something I think of as a tool. It's a learning experience for me. Like I've been able to just sit down and speak to a Darren Reese or an Andrew Parnham or a Kieran Walsh or a Sainaji or all these people that Nugget McNaught recently, that was quite a popular one, that really make the sport what it is, and just sit and speak with them for sometimes hours at a time. That's taught me a lot, which is, you know, a really useful tool, and has also just helped me grow, like expand my network, and, you know, just make more friends across the scene.
And for those who are not familiar, guys like Darren Reese was one of the first Australians to come over to Thailand and stay for a long time. He was at Sangmorka for about 2 years. Nugget McNaught, same. Sainaji is the main promoter behind Rebellion, one of the biggest shows in Thailand. Andrew Parnham has several successful athletes, Singh Payak and Yolanda Schmidt. He also has a small show you've competed on, CM to Sydney. And then I forget the last person you said. So
I think I mentioned Kieran Walsh too.
Oh yeah, Kieran Walsh has Muay Thai, which has several high-level fighters like David Penapede and some others. But how, you know, in Australia at least, how do you think fighters market themselves, and is it different for Australian fighters, do you think, than other fighters internationally?
What I would say about Australian fighters and how they market themselves, I think there's some guys are really, really good at it. Like they just have an impressive kind of, I guess, social media cadence. Like they have a strong ability to kind of build a certain presence. What I say, what strikes me about how Australians approach this kind of thing is the inconsistency across the board. And I guess I'm not as close to, for example, the scene in the United States. But I find in general, American athletes almost are more naturally kind of media trained. They have a better concept of building a brand and just a better understanding of how to do it. I find Australians, a lot of time, like you look at maybe what I would say is when you look at American athletes who are kind of making it, a certain degree of social media presence is kind of a prerequisite. Whereas here in Australia, you will see some of our highest level fighters just really don't play that kind of game, and fair play to them. It's not everyone's thing. But you'll see like a lot of guys that are really kind of absent from any kind of sort of marketing or self-branding at all. So I guess what I notice about Australia to how I perceive compared to the rest of the world is like a massive inconsistency in how guys approach this kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, because I think that, you know, Australia has a much more active Muay Thai scene than America. So, you know, we talked previously, and you're 24 years old. A reasonable amount of fights for you to expect per year is 6 per year. For an American athlete at a high level, you know, 30 plus fights, they can expect to see maybe 2, maybe 3 fights per year if they're like having a very, very strong year. You know, you're able to create your brand on a much better level just through your activity. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's probably, I think, again, this is based mostly on conversations I've had with people in the States, is just like our scene probably has a more consistent collection of shows also. I think you can kind of know, we have like the luxury, I suppose, compared to some other places, of we've always got a consistent calendar of shows. You know what's coming up, you know, and as you say, that's a way to brand yourself just kind of on its own, is you can appear on these shows somewhat routinely, and we have a reasonably strong, small and niche, but a reasonably strong following, and you can just build a name by kind of being there.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like, as you know, it's a similar model though in some ways for Australian athletes, in that they have to be ticket sellers? So do you feel like social media presence and marketing helps with your ticket sales, and how does that come into play with people's careers?
I mean, it's different on a case by case, I suppose. For me, like if I didn't have my social medias, I wouldn't be able to sell any of the tickets that I sell to my fights. It's just how people get in contact with you. It's how you give the information to the show. Like I know some people, I guess, just have much larger sort of word of mouth networks, whether it's big families, big working communities, people that they speak to face routinely. Because some people are big ticket sellers and not big kind of online presences. They just make it work that way. There's definitely a lot of examples of that. For me personally, and I know I'm not the only one that's like this, that just wouldn't work because, you know, no one would be able to get in contact. Like I'm lucky to have a great network of friends friends and family that want to support, but even without, you know, that's people very close to me. Even without social media, even they would struggle to pick up tickets for my fights. It's just the channel of communication is there. Maybe I don't leave the house enough. Maybe that's what.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I talked to with Liam Harrison recently about is that he's from Leeds, which has a very, very strong local community. Everyone supports, you know, Leeds football,
Yeah.
Leeds, you know, water polo, Leeds, you know, baseball, whatever. So people are very much like used to going to these things as community events, whereas that's not so popular maybe with other areas and regions.
Yeah. And I think you make a very good point there that I was interested to touch on here, is that Liam Harrison is probably the best example of a Western Muay Thai fighter with, you know, a really strong profile, almost a celebrity status. Effectively, yeah, celebrity status. He's a guy that can go anywhere in the world. And
yeah, I would say he's achieved celebrity status more so than Kevin Ross or, you know, maybe some of the more popular people as well.
And what that comes from, in my opinion, is, like you mentioned, he's from Leeds. It's a very supportive community. And if you trace his career back to where his platform started to grow, it was a lot of it was establishing a presence on those yokai shows that were local to him and his teammates, and leveraging that immediate network and creating that. And then that can kind of create something of a snowball effect. Yeah, you know, like your immediate network want to come, and then their friends want to come, and then it becomes a community event, and then it's just the thing to be at that town. And then that can even span out from there. Now you have, like, you know, you've got an exciting event. That event will now have the resources to put on, you know, bring in opponents and put on a higher quality show. Now you're getting some live stream attention. Now you're getting the eyes of people. But what it was all sourced from was that local hero status, that ability to kind of get your local community engaged and then build from there. And I think in large part in Muay Thai, when we talk about, everyone talks about in Muay Thai, when are we going to achieve what MMA has achieved? When are we going to get that UFC? You know, you hear it all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
People say, Muay Thai is just as exciting as MMA. Why is it not as popular? And I think people love to talk about the ultimate fighter moment. You know, people tell that story about the UFC of Forrest Griffin fought Stephen Bonner, and all of a sudden millions of people gave a shit about the UFC. That's not how it happened. If you actually, that's a nice and highly romanticized story. That's not really what happened. People think at too much of a macro level, like, how are we just going to flip this thing that really nobody cares about into a global phenomenon? Start micro, start local. So, like, engage the people that are around you to support you, and see how well you can grow from there. But I think we are thinking about what we want the end goal to be, and not how we actually get there. We're not okay, figure out what you want to do. Excellent. Then take the steps back. How do we actually build there? Because if you're sitting around going, when are we just going to turn on the TV one day and, you know, everyone all over the world's going to care about Muay Thai, you're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah. In some ways you have to reverse engineer everything. So, you know, we're coming to a close now. I just want to take a little bit of your time, but maybe another question or two. How do you feel you're engaging your local community, or, you know, your local fan base to sort of build that same presence as sort of early Liam Harrison?
I think it's largely about, this is sort of things that I'm very lucky to have people around me that are helping me do what I do. Like, you know, it's, as with many, has been kind of stalled briefly, but we have a local show, Fire in the Shire in the Southern Shire. And that's a great way for ourselves as a gym to get kind of our community involved and start to kind of put, you know, the local stars, the local fighters on that, kind of make them the centerpiece of an event. So that's something that we have, you know, at our disposal that hopefully will pick up again as we get a little bit closer to normal. But I think to the question more broadly, and this can apply to anyone, is like, you will do very well building a network that will help you if you are willing to help other people. Like you will, as look, it's pretty simple. Like you can go a long way from just kind of not being an asshole.
Yeah.
Like if you're around, the scene that supports you is the scene that you support. I've believed this for a very long time, especially in a sport like Muay Thai. For example, I care a lot about kind of really making the most of the community within our gym, and that's always meant that I'm willing to teach classes. I teach classes for free. I want to help people learn Muay Thai, and then that's a great way to get people across what you do, show them firsthand what it is that you do. And it comes back to the shows as well. Many shows still, I'm there setting up the chairs, organizing helping wherever I can at this local grassroots level. If you want the sport to grow, you have to help build it. That's where we're at with this sport. The sport will, people, I think, and I say this a lot on the podcast, people often talk about how they support Muay Thai. And what I've always brought it back to is if your idea of supporting Muay Thai is showing up and fighting when it's your turn to fight and oftentimes collecting a purse, that's not you supporting Muay Thai. That's Muay Thai supporting you. Yeah. Are you going to be the person that's setting up the chairs, picking up the bottles? And even for me now, it's gone beyond that. It's to refereeing and judging, trying to establish somewhere where you are actually actively helping the sport grow. Because really, I think sometimes we're in a position where we overestimate where the sport is at. It needs everyone's help. And you can't think because you're a fighter or because you're an active athlete that you're sort of above giving that help. Because if that's how you feel and that's how everyone feels, no one's there to support.
Well, just wrapping things up, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Obviously, you should tell people where they can find the podcast and maybe where Double Dragon's gym is.
Yeah, perfect. Double Dragon Martial Arts Gym is in Sutherland here in Sydney, New South Wales. You also find me some of the time with my friend Aram at Sichuan Muay Thai there in Rockdale. I got friends all over the place. If you are into Muay Thai, if you follow Muay Thai Ground, we would love to have you involved with Combat Chat. Like Matt said, we are putting out episodes pretty much every week. There really hasn't been a lot of Muay Thai specific shows that have come out with this consistency in the whole time that I've been supporting the sport. So, if that's your thing, if you're keen to give us a listen, we would love to have your support and we'd love to have you get involved. We're always answering questions, talking to people. Reach out to us, reach out to myself or the podcast if there's anything you'd like to hear discussed. And I'm also always trying to improve how well I understand what's going on elsewhere. So, if you're involved in the scene wherever you are, would love to, start chatting, figure out how things are for you. I'm always trying to learn what's going on elsewhere. So do reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Hugh, and looking forward to next bout and, of course, listening to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, man.
All right. See ya.
Take care.
Please like, comment, subscribe, and share.